Hey everybody, I hope that you are doing well. This is our 4 Leaders Only video for this week. And man, we only got a couple more of these left this year. And so excited about digging into our reading this week. Let me tell you this. We're going to spend most of today talking about Daniel, because there's some incredible things in the book of Daniel. We just finished it today. But before we get there, I want to talk quickly about our New Testament reading. We've been in 2 Peter, we've been in 1st and 2nd John, and really you can boil all that we've read recently in the New Testament down to a couple of things. I think, first of all, we need to love God more than we love the things of the world, which is true of us as leaders. We got to love God more than we love anything else. We need to keep His commands, which is true of leaders. As you're setting an example for the people around you, you need to keep the commands of God because they are the way to abundant life. And then thirdly, we got to love other people. And really, if you want to do well in leadership at the church, those are really the big things, right? Love God more than anything else, keep His commands, and love other people. And so let's dig in now to the book of Daniel. And I want to start in Daniel chapter 1. I think we see some things in Daniel and some of his friends that we can emulate as leaders in the church. And so the first is in Daniel chapter 1. So the Babylonians are capturing the people of God. They're taking them away. They're going to be in exile. And the king of Babylon says, hey, I need you to get me the best and the brightest. I need you to train them up, raise them up for a few years so that they can attend to me. These guys got to be the best of the best, the best looking, the smartest, the most intelligent, the most athletic, the strongest, right? Like these are the best of the best. And Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were a part of these guys, right? And so it says here, they taught these guys all kinds of things. They taught them the Babylonian language. They taught them Babylonian astrology. They taught them Babylonian history. They taught them all of these things. But one of the things they wanted Daniel and his friends to do is they wanted them to eat the meat and drink the wine that were served from the king's table. But because Daniel was a man who loved God more than anything else, like we talked about, and who kept God's commands, he said, hey, I really would like to be able to be excused from that. You see, this meat had been sacrificed to other idols. So Daniel knew that it would be wrong for him to eat it. Also, God told them what to eat and what not to eat. And so Daniel knew that he needed to keep God's commands as a leader. So he said, hey, listen, try us out for 10 days. Feed me vegetables and water. Feed us vegetables and water for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, look at us. Compare us to the guys who have been eating meat and drinking wine from the king's table, and then see where we stand. Because you see, Daniel had this significant trust in God where Daniel just believed if he did what God told him to do, that God would show up on his behalf. He just believed it. And I'm just saying, as a leader, what if we lived like we believed it? What if we treated our money like, you know what, I'm just going to do what God tells me to do, and I'm going to believe that God's going to show up on my behalf. In our actions, I'm going to live like God tells me to do it. And I'm just going to trust that God was going to show up on my behalf. And what happens? God shows up on Daniel's behalf. Here's what it says in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel determined that he wasn't going to defile himself with the king's food or with the wine he drank. So he asked permission not to defile himself. God had granted Daniel kindness and compassion from the chief eunuch. Yet he said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king who assigned your food and drink. What if he sees your face looking thinner than the other young men your age? You would endanger my life with the king. So this guy, Daniel's asking this guy to put his life on the line for Daniel so that Daniel can be obedient to God. So Daniel told him, please test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then examine our appearance and the appearance of the young men who are eating the king's food and deal with your servants based on what you see. God shows up, right? So he agreed with them. 10 days, tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, listen to this, they looked better and healthier than all the young men who were eating the king's food. So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. And then God rewarded Daniel's faithfulness. You see, Daniel decided, hey, I'll do some things, but I'm going to draw the line here where it is going to force me to be disobedient to God. I'm going to draw the line there. I'm not going to be willing to do that. And I'm just going to trust that God's going to show up on my behalf. And as a leader, I need you to be in that place to say, hey, I will not cross the line of disobedience to God. I'm going to do whatever God tells me, and I'm going to trust that God is going to show up on my behalf. We see the same thing happen in Daniel chapter 3. Nebuchadnezzar is the king, and he makes a gold statue, it says in Daniel 3:1, that is 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. So they get together and they say, hey, whenever anybody in our country hears the sound of any type of music, they are to fall face down and worship the gold statue that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. But whoever didn't do it would be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, again, just like Daniel in chapter 1, they said, hey, there's some things we're willing to do. We're not willing to be disobedient to God and what he commands of us. And so I get that you're telling me to do this, but to do this would mean that I was worshiping something else other than God, and I'm not willing to cross that line. And so I'm going to be obedient to God. I'm not going to cross the line that I'm not supposed to cross, and I'm going to trust that God's going to show up for me. Here's what happens. So they turn these guys into the king. So Nebuchadnezzar goes in this furious rage in verse 13. So they bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to him, and he says, is it true that you don't serve my gods or worship the gold statue I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear any kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship, you're going to get thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Nebuchadnezzar's a little bit cocky and arrogant, is he? Who is your God that you think you can rescue him from me, the most powerful man on the earth? You got to be kidding me. Here, listen to what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say in verse 16 of Daniel 3. Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. How great is that? Nebuchadnezzar's all arrogant, and they're like, we don't even have to answer this question if we don't want to. But verse 17, if the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he can rescue us from your power, king. So if the God we serve exists, if the God we believe in, if he really does exist, listen, I'm telling you, he can rescue us from this furnace of blazing fire. He can also rescue us from you because he's more powerful than you. Verse 18, but even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you set up. So even if he doesn't show up, we're still not gonna disobey him. We're still not gonna cross the line, and we're gonna trust that he is gonna show up. So what happens? They get thrown into the blazing fire, into the furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar freaks out because he said, hey, he bound them up and he throws them in. Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, well, there are 4 guys in there now, and now they're not bound anymore. Why? Because Jesus showed up with them in the middle of the fire. You see, so many times we want God to deliver us out of the fire, but the best thing for us is to allow Jesus to come and walk with us in the middle of the fire. Because do you know what happened? They were bound up, but God used the fire and Jesus being with them in the fire to unbind them, to set them free of what was binding them. And so many times God uses the fire, or God uses heat in our lives to set us free from some things, but we don't have to walk in it alone. We don't necessarily need to always ask to get pulled out of the fire, but we do know as believers that we've got Jesus walking through the fire with us. So God uses this fire to set them free, for Jesus to show up and walk with them. Why? Because they said, we're going to be obedient to God. We're going to keep his commands. We're not going to cross this line, and we're just going to trust that God's going to show up on our behalf. And then lastly, in Daniel chapter 6, the same thing happened. Another king is king, Darius. And he has all of these people over it, and they know, they don't like Daniel. They're jealous of Daniel. And so they know the only way they're going to ever trap Daniel if it's something to do with God. That's the kind of reputation that Daniel had. And I want you as a leader at our church to have that same kind of reputation. That you have a reputation for God and the things of God. And so they talk the king into saying, hey, make a rule that nobody can pray to anyone other than you, king. And so he does. So Daniel, of course, says, hey, listen, I'm going to be obedient unless it causes me to be disobedient to God. This would cause me to be disobedient to God. So I'm not going to pray to you. I'm going to continue to pray to God. So they trap him in this. They catch him. They take him to the king. The consequence is getting thrown into the lion's den. But again, Daniel said, you know what? I'm not going to disobey God. I'm going to keep his commands. I'm going to draw the line here. And I'm going to trust that God's going to show up on my behalf. And what happens? God does. God shuts the mouth of the lions, shows up on Daniel's behalf because he had this phenomenal trust in God. So let me give you a summary of what we see in the book of Daniel. We see men who are willing to love God more than anything else. They refuse to worship anything other than God or put anything before God. They say, hey, I will do some things. I will be obedient in some cases. But when this obedience to the king or to the state causes me to be disobedient to God, that's where I'm drawing a line, and I'm not crossing this line. And I'm going to stand firm in this, and I'm going to trust that God's going to show up. So as a leader, that's what I need you to do. I need you to trust in God significantly, and I need you to say, I'm going to love God more than anything else. I refuse to put anything in front of God. And if something causes me to be disobedient to God, I'm not going to cross the line, and I'm going to trust that God shows up on my behalf. People who lead the way like this will lead a significant revival in our community. And that's what we're after. I love you so much. Thanks for leading during this time. I'll see you next week.